I'm delighted to have you on this week. This is Jonathan McGuinness, your host. And today is a very special interview. We're going to go in a slightly different direction in terms of the content, not in terms of the type of person who's driving what's happened, but the content is now going to go in what we would often consider a technical way. I'm very, very lucky to have the presence of someone who's been working for over 3, almost 4 decades in one of the most complex industries that exist. And that complexity is derived from large, major global corporations and their ability to change and cope with those changes and have all of their systems supported by those changes during it. First of all, please let me welcome to the podcast Daljit Banger. Daljit.
Hi, good afternoon, Jonathan. Thank you for having me.
Delighted to have you. Delighted to be able to sort of extract some or distill some of the knowledge that you have in your brains from all of this exposure to quite complex and far-reaching systems that reach into everybody's day-to-day life, whether you're a normal person walking the street or whether you're the most technical guru who has to go in and do a complex project within something. So I'd like to start with, on the title of the program, I put the title as Enterprise Systems Architecture. Now, architecture is a huge thing. And before I even get into the enterprise systems part, quite often when I say, oh, I'm meeting an architect, I say, well, what building is he building? No. Because I come from the software world, I have to go, no. I mean a software or systems architect. So there's a lot of just even getting that name right and applying it to this virtual world, I will call it, or this technical world. Architecture really means, well, I'd like you to tell me, what does an architect do? And then we'll get into the different types of architects.
Okay, so let me start with some simple definitions. Yeah. So the key word we use is enterprise. So what is an enterprise? Well, an enterprise is an organization or an undertaking. It could be for commercial or not for commercial, not for profit. And that enterprise has a specific set of outcomes. It could be products, it could be services, different capabilities, which are driven by 3 things: the people, the places, and the things. And if we say, well, that's our definition of an enterprise, and at a macro level, that applies to most organizations. If we then step down and say, right, okay, well, what's an enterprise architect, right? And really, the role of an enterprise architect is to produce what I call conceptual blueprints, architecting the enterprise. Now, within those conceptual blueprints, what you're looking at is things like the structures, the operations, and these are driven by the principles, processes, patterns, and they use classic tools. That they'd be, an enterprise architect would be looking at things like the political environment the enterprise operates in, the social environment, the economic, and also the technical environment. And if you look at what an enterprise architect does, it takes in, various factors, including the human side of things, to architect the enterprise, produce the blueprint for that organization to deliver its outcomes, right? Okay. Now, there's other functions that also deliver those outcomes. There's marketing, HR, finance, all of these kind of things. So an enterprise architect. So what's happened over the past few years is the term enterprise architect has kind of been eroded to cover all kinds of things. So what I did a couple of years ago, I started using the word enterprise systems architect. Now, what an enterprise systems architect? Well, I would say it's a subset of an enterprise architect. And really the focus is on the technology side. It's understanding the technology landscape of the enterprise, and some of these landscapes span multiple continents. Some of the organizations I work with have technology spreading numerous countries, and there's lots of things that have to be considered. But really it's about producing it's understanding the technology landscape and also understanding the technology ecosystem that the enterprise operates in. That's all the other things. It's, technology is not so much what's inside your organization, but also the external factors. People are bringing their own devices to work. These kind of things need to be factored in. So at a macro level, we've got this enterprise, this organization, this undertaking, and then within that we've got a set of enterprise architects who look at how they're going to deliver the outcomes, how they're going to structure the organization in terms of, uh, I don't know, I got a bit stuck there, but the enterprise architect is really looking at the big picture, okay, looking at external forces and all of that. But the enterprise systems architecture is focusing primarily on the technology landscape, and that's a big beast in itself.
Like that sounds like a huge undertaking. When I think of organizations, we think of the CEO as the starting point of the organization, and in some way the person who provides all the systems to the understanding of how that layout is done is the enterprise systems architect in some way, at least from a technology standpoint.
As well as, I've come up with a generic canvas. I call it the stack, and that kind of should give you an indication of what the mindset of this enterprise systems architect should encapsulate. Oh, brilliant, you've got it up. So if we were to step back and look at each single layer, and all of these layers are interrelated, what happens at the top layer, the business operating model layer, will have a downstream impact on the various layers below. So if I give you a quick overview of each layer, and then we talk about some of the impacts and how this can be used.
Okay, that would be excellent. Thanks.
Brilliant. Okay, if you don't mind. And I call it a conceptual canvas because, listen, Jonathan, no single person will know all of this stuff. It's some, technology within large enterprises that span multiple continents is very complex. And what this tries to do is present you with not a tick box, but a mechanism of control that allows you to inform and direct certain activities.
Okay.
And I'll go through this stack. At the very top layer, every organization has an operating model, whether it's a small shopkeeper or whether it's a large supermarket, they all have an operating model. And that operating model has to encapsulate so many different things. And what I've tried to do in this is I've tried to say, well, these are the kind of things you need to consider. And I've also put some of the tools that you could use. So on the right-hand side, I've put the tools that you could use. And on the left-hand side, I've said, right, these are the things to consider. So if I was to pick two of them on the right-hand side, there's a guy called Michael E. Porter who wrote, Competitive Advantage. And
okay,
decades ago, I've got the original book up there somewhere. And he talked about industry rivalry, and he talked about the forces, that would affect the industry, which would then affect the value streams within that organization. So we've got various tools, and these are tools that are available widely. You can read up on them. There's so many things that, these are well documented. So, I talk about PEST, which stands for political, economic, social, and technical. And that's a way to, an organization can look at its external forces and its internal forces. It's a way of cataloging stuff and say, right, okay, where do we sit on certain scales? And these are tools that are available to everyone. Okay, and on the left-hand side, I've said, right, these are the kind of things that you as an enterprise systems architect should consider, but also an enterprise architect should consider. So the external forces, what are the external forces that are going to impact your technology landscape in the future? And one example, and we'll use this, and two examples actually, we'll use this, GDPR. That was an external force. That was a regulation which came from Europe, which now we've left Europe. We've got the Data Privacy Act of the UK. Now, that was an external force that affected all organizations, right? And we'll talk about the downstream impact within the stack. But that was something that the technology guys needed to be aware of. That was coming, because that gave various people the rights to access their information within an organization, and not many organizations were set up to do that, especially the right to deletion, but I'll come back to that.
So just to maybe before we go into that, for those who aren't fully aware of what that means, when you do get into the GDPR, will you give a little summary of
Yeah,
what that
sure.
means around data for the organization? That'd be
Yeah, as
fantastic.
we go through the stack. So basically, in GDPR, I mean, to cut to the bone, it gave you as an individual the right to ask a company what information they held on you, and under certain circumstances, depending on the organisation, obviously you can't ask the police force what information they hold on you. It gave you the right to ask for that information to be deleted. And there's something called a subject access request, which you can ask any organisation, what information do you hold on me? How do you process that information? Is it accurate? And all the other kind of stuff. And that law came into effect, and it did have a major impact on organisations. And organisations had to spend millions to making sure that they were compliant. I'll use another regulation for insurance companies as an example as well on the downstream impact. But if I just go through the top layer, and I'll quickly whiz through this. So there's the external forces. Every company, for example, if they're working in the financial domain, mustn't have a good understanding of their customer. And it's called KYC, know your customer. And most organizations will check their customers, new customers, against the UN sanctions list. So there are external forces at play that will affect your technology and the way you deliver your services. Okay. And then also, at that business operating model, you've got these things called drivers for change. And I've tried to cluster them. And the drivers for change could be the way the industry is going. We saw COVID last year, and the driver for change there was more home working. So a lot more companies had to provision more technology to allow their workers to work from home. So that was a major disruptor, and that was a major driver for change. Also, the strategy of the organization. You get new chief executives coming in who want to go in a different direction. That will impact, and that becomes a driver for change. And that's, I tried to cluster them all there. Then also, I've said, look, in order to understand your technology ecosystem, you've got to look at the structure of the organization. Some of these structures have evolved over years. And it's very difficult to move if these structures are in place, the business processes are in place. Very difficult to move these things, but you need to understand them and you need to be aware of them. And then the kind of business you operate, are you business to business? Are you business to consumer? Are you consumer to business? The business model you operate must be clearly understood by the enterprise systems architects. The next thing is really, every organization pulls in information. It uses, reference data from third parties. So how you pull information in and how you push information out of your organization is very important to understand. And then I've put other things like financial management, capital management, funding, cash flow, all of these kind of things you need to be aware of. And what I've tried to do at that very top layer of the conceptual canvas, I've said, right, okay, every organization, every enterprise system architects need to understand their enterprise, the external forces that are going to impact that organization, which may act as a driver or catalyst for some kind of change to the technology. And then I move down to the next level. And the next level is about, right, so we now know our business operating model. Now, what are the business processes that support that operating model? And what I try to do here is just give you some things that you need to be aware of. Are your processes manual? Are they automated? And then I've said, right, okay, if they're automated, how are they executed? What are the triggers for those processes? You might have an order come in, and that order may result in certain activities being undertaken. There's something called order to cash. You take your order, how is that turned into cash? There's processes that support that, and you need to be aware of that. And then on the process side of things, I've said, right, okay, how do you execute your process? How do you design your process? How do you actually document your processes? What notational standards have you adopted? I like you know, as you can see from the canvas, I like swim lanes because that allows me to show. So I use something called BPPN, which is a notational
Yeah.
standard. I also use UML. So these are the kind of things. Now, if you've got 1,000 people working in your IT department, you know, this becomes
Yeah.
very important. How you represent your systems, the notational standards, how you represent your processes, because someone developing a system in India, for example, needs to communicate that with someone in China who's going to actually deliver those processes. You know, so you need common standards, and great efficiencies and savings come from having those standards. So what I've now done is I've said, right, you've got your business operating model. Underneath that, you've got a set of a set of
Yeah.
processes that support that operating model. And you see what
Yeah.
we're doing, we're starting to decompose it. And then
Absolutely.
what I've then said is, right, okay, if we've got these processes, what are the capabilities and services that your organization needs, not that it's got, you know, what it needs and has, in order to deliver those business processes. And then what I've said is these capabilities and services, and I've tried to cluster them, and I've given examples in the book of what, you know, what would fall into that. But you may have technical capabilities. For example, a business process. Okay, let me step up another layer. You may have a email mail shot that you want to send out to everyone. Okay, now you may have a process that says, right, okay, we want to send it
Yeah.
out on this day. The capability you need will be a communications capability. I'm not saying an email capability because I've broken that down into a service. It's basically about decomposing everything to the next layer down.
Got it.
Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
And in those capabilities and services, I've tried to capture as much information that I think that the individual architect or the group of architects will need to be aware of. Yeah. All the way down to microservices and microcomponents, and even ownership. Who owns these services? Because as we find with data, there has to be a custodian who can manage the integrity and quality of that. Anyway, so we've covered 3 layers. Now we move to the execution side of things. Yeah. And this is we start with the application layer. And if you're an organization and you operate £1 billion enterprise, you're not going to have one application. You're not going to have one application that does everything. You're going to have thousands of applications.
Thousands. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thousands. I And you're going to have to catalog those applications, and you're going to have to, you know, applications come to the end of life. They have to be maintained, they have to be supported, they have to be patched, all that kind of stuff. So what this layer says is, right, okay, how are you commissioning your applications? You know, you may be buying commercial off-the-shelf packages, for example. Then there's a whole stream of activity that comes with that one statement, commercial off the shelf. You know, what are your vendor agreements? You know, what are your support agreements and all of that kind of stuff? Are you buying it as a service? And then if you're doing bespoke development, you know, what frameworks are you using? There's so many questions that come around that.
So it sounds like then, Daljit, the 0, 1, and 2 are the meta structure, and now we're getting into 3. We're getting into the material and tangible aspects of we'll say actual structure of the applications. I suppose a question as you move from 2 to 3, and you mentioned commercial off the shelf, kind of build and buy type scenarios. Huge organizations do actually all of the above. So I think, you know, it requires quite a comprehensive understanding of what layer 3 might be, because, you know, we've both worked in, we say, tens of thousands of people organizations where, you know, all of those scenarios globally need to be in the mix. So I'm just curious how level 3 is put together.
Well, what I've tried to do with level 3 is I've tried to say, look, you know, there's so many different things that you need to think about. And let me be clear. Depending on the size of the organization, if it's small, you know, we started with our definition of an enterprise, you know. If it's a small organization, this may be one individual who's responsible for delivering all of this. So currently I'm supporting an organization, I'm a consultant to them, and they've got one guy who handles all of their IT. I mean, their turnover is quite high. We're talking in the tens of millions, but they've got one individual who's responsible for supporting all of this. But they've outsourced all their technology. So it's all about relationship management, you know. But he still needs to be aware of, you know, the delivery mechanisms. You know, it is outsourced. So how is that individual going to manage everything? You know, and there's a bit of technical understanding that he also needs to do. And he pulls
Yeah.
me in when he's stuck. But you know, but if we step back, what we're trying to do here, so you know, large organizations will have not one architect who does all of this, but they will have teams of architects. And you would have one, you know, we call them an application architect who would focus at this layer, who would, his primary role will be just to understand the application estate and the connections, you know, up and down. You know, at the top layer, you would probably have what we call business architects who would spend a lot of their time understanding the business processes and understanding the external forces that are going to impact the organization. And these guys all work together. Yeah. And then as we start going down, you know, in the application space, you've got to think about the connectivity, the analytics, the reporting, all of that kind of stuff. But as you go down, you say, right, okay, what's the information that I need in order to support those applications? Now, you could turn that around and say, well, hold on, what information do I need? And what applications will provide me that information? You know, this is all interchangeable. It is not, you know, it's not all fixed in stone. These things do move up and down. Yeah, you can move, you know. But at the information layer, you've got to understand, you know, where your information is coming from. Is it of value to you, right?
Yeah.
And also, who is responsible for maintaining the integrity of that information? And there's loads of things, you know, the whole journey, the data journey. And large organizations, this becomes very important because we talked about GDPR, but that's for Europe. In Canada, they've got their own data privacy. You know, Australia's got their own data privacy. And as more and more, we're going to talk about the next layer, but as more and more companies move to cloud-based services, which is a new, it's basically hosting by a third party, yeah, global third party. The location of your information, where do you actually store that information, becomes very, very important, you know. And the protective marking, is this information confidential? You know, will it, you know, if this information got out, will it lose us business? You know, is it commercially sensitive? But so the whole data layer, the management, the retention, you know, the integrity, all of that fits in one layer, and that's quite a big layer. And it's becoming more and more complex because now we're starting to move data all across the globe. You may, as a small company, think, right, okay, I'm going to go to a third-party cloud-based service. I'll use Amazon as an example. Amazon provides you, you know, servers where you can store your data, but those servers may be replicated somewhere else. And you know, if you operate in a country, say like, for instance, Finland, the KNP want to know where that information is being held. So this now is not just about, you know, logical data models and schemas. It's also about where you're persisting that data, that physical data. And then what we're doing, we then start moving to the layers below, and that's really the technical layers, you know. And I've broken these down into the logical and the physical because you need to be able to cluster this, you know, I talked about controlling, informing, and directing. In order to control all of this, you need to decompose it a bit further, okay? And the next few layers, I won't spend too much time. I think I've given this quite a bit, but the next layers are very much about, you know, how the information is transmitted between A and B. How do you actually log things, you know? And on the right-hand side of the you know, I've got the monitoring, the registry service, naming services. This is all complex stuff and it needs to be understood. And below that, we've got, you know, where are you hosting your applications? You know, are you buying, nowadays, there are companies that provide you full suites that allow you to do, you know, all of your business at a third party. I mean, who now hosts their own email when you can get companies like, Microsoft providing you 365 for. I've got about 8 servers sitting there I've switched off because
Yeah.
it's cheap for me to go to GoDaddy. You know, $3.99, you get a server a month. And the last layer is quite an important one because it's a wrapper for everything. It's not, I know it sits at the bottom, but it's a wrapper for everything. So on the left-hand side, we've got the non-functional requirements, the non-functional capabilities, performance, the runtime characteristics of your environments. Then we've got the disaster recovery, which affects everything. Let's be honest, it does. Recovery point time, recovery point objectives. Then we've got the security, and then we've got the governance for all of this, you know, the governance framework. And what I've tried to do, Jonathan, is I've tried to put this into one diagram. And I've called it a conceptual canvas. And really what this diagram is meant to do is it's meant to nurture the mindset. Because look, you know, we talk about producing conceptual blueprints, but really,
Yeah.
you know, delivering IT systems for complex landscapes, it really is about understanding quite a lot of things. And I hope I've highlighted that, you know, it's not just understanding your application. There's all these other things that need to be factored in, you know. And what this allows you to do by understanding all of this and having a kind of taxonomy which allows you to kind of cluster pieces of information into their own little containers, it provides you an overview, and that should give you some kind of advantage for yourself. It won't give your organization, you know, if we step back and say, right, well, how can this be used? Well, the way you use it is basically in your control informed direct model. You know, it allows you to control your technology ecosystem and your landscape. It allows you to inform third parties and interested individuals of how your estate looks. And then it allows you to direct your technology in the direction you want it to go. So we started off by talking about GDPR. If I was to, and I did this in Scotland, a presentation I did, I actually took GDPR. I mapped every bit that I thought needed to be factored. So, you know, the top bit, we had the external forces, that, imagine that being blue. Then we knew that there was some manual and automated processes because people can request information. So new processes have to be thought out. Then you needed the tools and capabilities to allow you to find the information and then delete the information. And then also you needed to be able to tag that information as, you know, sensitive, not sensitive, commercial, so it can be distributed, and the geolocation of that information, and then where is it hosted, you know. And that one simple law, GDPR, impacts everything. And if I was to use another example, if I may, if we look at the insurance industry, they had something a couple of years ago, and it comes into force next year. They had something called IFRS 17, which is a new accounting standard. And basically what it does, it allows, and IFRS are trying to do this anyway, it allows you to, you know, an investor in Hong Kong and an investor in the US looking at a set of accounts based on IFRS 17 will both get the same information. Okay, they both understand the characteristics of that organization. However, what that regulation requires is now your profit and loss needs to also factor in current earnings, future earnings from your actuarial data, you know, how things are calculated and the risk and all of that. And that had a major impact on pulling in sets of information. So that really had a major impact on the information service layer, and the reporting layer, because your reporting layer now, you know, your chart of accounts have changed. So you need to modify all your financial systems. You now need to also start, you know, how you ingest that information into those financial systems also changed because you needed to get more information. So that one regulation, that external force, now had a downstream impact on the technology ecosystem. So what this tries to do is, if you said to me, right, there's a new law coming in, and it's a new sanctions law against certain types of companies, we would have to then go and say, right, it's an external force. We know it's a sanction. what are the applications and processes we need in order to meet our obligations under the law. And that's really what the stack is about. It's about giving you that kind of mindset to say, right, this is a path you need to consider. And I think I've covered quite a bit in it, and I've tried to document it. And I have shared this quite exhaustively. This is available on my blog and various
Well,
other sites.
I'd like to add a bit, Daljit. In 2009, you may know, in Pittsburgh, the G9 met, and it was after the 2007-2008 global crisis. And a big part of the problem was how financial derivatives were being used or misused during that. And that brought in some directives, which ended up in CFTC, SEC, EMIR, MiFID II, and I happened to run all of those front to back for one of the biggest banks in the world. So I ended up being part of what we'll call probably an elite group of front to back program managers. So you needed to know everything from when a trade happened until it got reported out to the regulator, and rework the entire organization such that it could be done. And I know you see it with the cap of an enterprise architect. I'm just seeing it as with the cap of we'll say a global front to back program manager. I had to learn this, but I didn't have this map. I would have found this a very useful tool to actually help, because what I had to do was find out what were the resources, get involved the architects, and get the groups of people responsible for all of these. So I actually think for large organizations, PMs involved in those type of front to back structures, this would be a very useful framework, because they interact with the architects on a daily basis. So I would see it as a fantastic communication tool where those types of changes have to happen, in addition to the enterprise architect. One of the major stakeholders are the PMs, who are helping them get the resources in place to do that. And I really like how it breaks down into, from everything from the regulation coming out until what technology is used where, in what regulation, and what data is staying in what place and is allowed to do X, Y, and Z. So, there's a lot more, even though people are looking at this, and you're saying you're an architect, and I'm just putting one hat on here. Program managers and also the teams could start to see how they fit into the bigger puzzle. And when somebody as a team member sees how they are relevant to the big picture of something strategic being done, they feel more valuable. So I just wanted to give you those sort of additional perspectives that I see from that other side of things, where this could be a very useful tool as programs that have that sort of scope and breadth within an organization to enable the teams to be on the same page.
Yeah. I think, look, the technology ecosystem is getting more and more complex every day, especially as we move to connected devices. Your fridge is now connected to a back-end data server and it's providing information. This whole IoT thing, I shouldn't call it a thing actually, but I think the whole technology ecosystem is getting very, very complex. And, this is just one method of allowing you to make sure that you, for example, if you are developing an IoT system, you would say, right, okay, well, there's an external party that we need to factor in, right? What are the processes we're going to need in order to support that? And it's just a way of working. It really is. It just allows, it gives you some kind of structure. And you know what? I've used this over the past few years, and it helps me. And also I've run some classes with the BCS where, we run what they call practitioners days, and, I think it's well received. I did have a concern where I was distributing this and I needed to put some meat to the bone. So I tried to document it all, which I ended up, which resulted in the book, if I'm totally honest. Yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to come to next, Daljit. You've decided to, produce your content, share it in the forms of blog, forms of teaching, in the form of, your latest book with the enterprise system architecture. why do you decide to do that? You know, well, a lot of people gain that knowledge, or many people don't. You know, there's not so many people who have that level of comprehensive years together in these types of positions. But why are you sharing? You know, power is often perceived in the keeping of knowledge. Why have you gone the other route and said, I'm going to share this content? Why does that work for you?
Because there's three reasons. Okay, first of all, I'm what they call a practitioner. Yeah. And you often land on sites where you have large teams. I'm doing various projects at the moment, and you have large teams, and you need to build that confidence with that team. Now, one of the easiest things, if, for example, you were running a team of, say, 50 people, and all of a sudden you heard, hold on, we've got this guy called Daljit coming in to help us out. The first thing you're going to do is get onto Google, and you're going to think, well, who is this guy, right? Now, whether the who, I don't really care about, right? But the thing is, it's the what. What value can this guy bring to the party? And by reading my material, you know, when I sit with Java developers, they can see some of the blogs I've written in the past, you know, how to refactor your AS400 using WebSphere App Server. So I try and publish some stuff, that material, which I think, A, will add value, but B, also will save me a lot of time. When I hit the ground, I really want the guys to focus on delivering and not trying to analyze my capabilities or what I know and all of that. And, you know, large projects, let's be honest, they're very political. You know, they always are. And when you get involved in a project, the first thing the team want to do is try, and this is the wrong word, but not try and suss you out. If they've got your material, if I was to join any enterprise architecture team tomorrow, I can guarantee you that team would have all read my material, and we won't waste time. We'll focus on delivering rather than wasting time on, let's see what this guy knows and what's his approach and all of that. So that's one of the values. That's one of the values it drives. The second thing is, there is a lot of knowledge, and I'd like to share it. I think, we ran some sessions. I used to work with the the BCS Enterprise Architecture Group, and we ran some sessions at the universities, for enterprise architecture to promote it. There's no value in it for me. I've actually lost billable income by doing some of that stuff. But the thing is, you're passing your knowledge on to the next set of architects. And I think, that I think is a good thing in itself. And the third thing is, it's also a way of challenging yourself. So I was asked to do some advisory for a Canadian insurance company. It was only a 1-hour session, but the advisory was on business architecture. And it was really good. I had to think through some of the answers, and they had specific questions they wanted to ask. And, this was 3 weeks ago, and I am now taking that material and putting pen to paper and, preparing the next blog, because I think that was quite useful. If, a company in Canada requiring a British consultant's advice, imagine how many other people will find that useful. I think information sharing is the way forward. You can't, nothing, if you try and hold back your information, or, there's no value to anyone. It just, in the long run, you will not benefit. I think I've been producing content now since 2005. And the reason I do that is because, A, it allows people to question some of my thinking, and that's good because you learn from it. But secondly, you are sharing your knowledge, and, that I think is a good thing.
Well, I just remember, you just remind me of an example. Years ago, I was working in Norway, helping set up a virtual telecoms network. And I was definitely the most technical person there. And the management team didn't actually know how this all fit together. So the CTO called me in, Daljit, and said, would you explain to us how a virtual network sits on top of, a normal GSM network at that stage? So I went through it, and I think I spent 3 to 4 hours with the entire management team. And what I realized during the conversation, you just made me think of this, is I shared everything I knew within those few hours. And part of me went, hold on, knowledge is power, but I've just shared everything. What's going on here? Will I be out the door now? But then I realized, hold on, I'll be 0.5% more knowledgeable tomorrow because I continuously learn. And I 0.5% the day after. They're just on catch up. If they want to use it, I'm absolutely delighted. But so since that, and that's 20 odd years ago, I've always been a giver of knowledge because I always expect to be learning more tomorrow. Would you say, based on what you've told me, would that be true for you as well?
Look, the thing is, we are the sum of our experiences. You know, that's a given. You know, every project and one of the benefits of being a freelance consultant is you're working on multiple projects, and because you're working on multiple projects, you learn what's good and what's bad. Okay. Now, in the enterprise architecture space, which has grown and grown, it's quite a large space now. We've got individuals that will go on a course for a certain certificate, and a 4-day course will make them a certified architect. Now, if I was interviewing you and you said to me, "Oh, I'm a certified architect," I would think, really? You know, it's about project experience. You learn from your mistakes and other people's mistakes. I think, you know, I think these things evolve over time. You know, your knowledge base evolves over time. I think, you know, certificates are good and great, but really it is about experience. And for me, sharing that experience is a good thing because it's honestly, it saves time. I've been in a situation where I've actually said to someone, "Can you just go and read my blog? I haven't got time for this." Right? And it helps. It helps, you know. And I like creating content. I'm working on something at the moment, which will be out in 2022. Now you're thinking, why is it going to take so much time to produce that? Because it's not so much the time to produce the content, it's the thinking that goes behind it. Every blog I've written normally takes me a month, 2 months, because writing the text is easy, but validating the material and then doing a proof of concept and socializing it, that's really the big part. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, you make me think, Daljit, you know, a lot of experience there and you're sharing it. It's great. We also have young people now who are going into the technology industry. I could talk about my oldest son just left college. He's starting his first role as a software engineer at the moment. And it's an industry that's even boomed during COVID. So a lot of people will be going that direction, you know, no matter what we say or do. What advice would you have to somebody starting out in the tech industry about how to proceed? How, you know, if they're just in the beginning of their journey, they're considering technology as a way they want to go, what would you say to them, Daljit?
Right. So there's three things here, and I do feel sorry for the young entering the IT space in the UK. Okay. And I've had this discussion with loads of people because I've got 3 young kids as well. You know, they're all doing their second degrees and one's just finishing her first. You know, the career choices, you know, things change. If you look back to when we worked in IT, you know, I was sponsored to do my master's degree by a bank, First National Bank, in the good old days where you had day release. That's not available now, right? I've just hired an individual to work on a full-time basis for me to develop.
Yeah.
I'm developing a sanctions portal. That's a different topic, but that individual, I am paying them what I would charge my day rate in the UK. I'm paying them a month because they're not in the UK. They are, you know, several thousands of miles away, but
Yeah.
they are exceptionally qualified. They're full stack developers, and boy, do they know their stuff. So you're now competing on a global stage. You know, small companies like mine can hire individuals, the other side of the globe, to develop software for them. And you've got someone coming fresh out of university. No way are they going to accept the salary that I would offer, right? Okay. So my advice is threefold,
Yeah.
really. One is play the long game, invest in yourself. Yeah. Don't invest too much in understanding. I mean, know your craft. So definitely learn to program in a language. You have to be able to, program in a language. That language
Absolutely.
may not be there in 30 years time or 20 years time, but understanding the basic principles. So for example, when I worked in Zurich, I sat the Java exams. This is 23 years ago. Now, if you asked me to write a bit of Java code today, probably couldn't, right? Unless I went through a lot of books and all of that kind of stuff. But I was a certified Java developer 23 years ago, yeah, when it was first coming out of the Sun Labs. So
Sure.
you need to invest in. You need to invest in things of value that give you longevity. So I'll give you another example. I don't know if you remember the Novell Certified Network exams,
I do,
2013.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now you know, and I know, in the heydays, a Novell certified engineer would have earned thousands, right? If you had spent a year doing the Novell CNE, all right, or you had done a year to do, I don't know, a top-up master's degree or something, right? 20 years down the line, Novell CNE, you ask half the young people, they don't even know what that is, right? Your master's degree or your secondary degree or any further education, that is still on your CV, and that still adds value. So if you're coming out of university, I think you're always going to be constantly learning. Play the long game, not the short game. Master your craft, yeah. And also you have to be prepared to go anywhere in the globe. Roles are no more. You cannot sit in Maidenhead and expect to go and work in Slough. Or you have to think, right, I have to go and get on a plane, may have to work in Finland, may have to work in Sweden, may have to work in Switzerland. You've got
Yeah.
to think global hat on. And you're always going to be working with multinational teams. So, you need to have a
Well,
certain mindset.
you just reminded me of a few things from my own experience, Daljit. I started off with the same. I think we started off with Pascal and Fortran 77, and because I was more into the physics in the beginning.
Mm.
But once you learn syntax, I probably, and I'm still a bit of I'll download Ethereum and make a few smart contracts. I like to understand how things work. Doesn't mean I'll be a developer of that software. But what I really found helpful when I was teaching, I've taught all my kids how to code, was not the language, whether it's Java or the latest, Flutter multi-platform language. There's a concept of clear code and a concept of sort of thinking logically end to end and not duplicating what you do. All of the actual clarity of logic of learning those types of things can be applied in so many domains
Oh,
that I have found that like extremely useful independent of the language part. And I can see that and I'm just using my kids as an example, those things that I've helped them learn has helped them in other subjects, because if there's inconsistencies, they'll even spot it in a completely different subject. So there's a lot more to it than I think just knowing a language. It gives you a structured approach to how you even communicate, maybe.
exactly. I do feel sorry for the young, if I'm totally honest, because I think the past year has been incredibly difficult for people leaving university. I think but we'll see. I think it can only get better. I think trends tend to follow, and I think but I do believe in mastering the craft. Understand it really well. I'm working with I'm working for a bank at the moment, and the team are all based offshore.
Yeah.
And I don't think the team have mastered their craft. So I think a lot of organisations have outsourced their technology to foreign far locations, but I think a lot of that will be coming back. I don't think the business model stands to actually offshore as much as possible. So I think that the IT industry will get better, but the problem is the short term, not the long term. In the short term, these roles aren't in abundance as we would expect.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, so how do you see, probably kind of to ask your last, how do you see it going forward, maybe in the longer term? Because technology seems to be taking this is a more abstract because you're very technical. You know, Amazon is more part of our life. Logistics firms are more part of our life. The landscape that you were talking about maybe just doesn't apply to enterprises anymore, but we have to interact with an entire landscape as individuals. Do you think we're going to become more technocratic, or technology sometimes, as it gets better, it dematerializes? So, in the sense that, you know, when a computer came out, it was a huge and probably took up a household building. And now the power of your mobile phone is probably better than that building was originally. Where do you, as an enterprise architect, and because you've a great insight to that, where do you see it going, Daljit,
Yeah,
potentially?
technology has always been there to support. It's never been there to, um, what's going to happen in the next 20 years? I don't know. I know that the
Sure.
population is becoming more tech savvy. Um, my kids, the amount of computing power they've got access to is amazing. Um, and they are more computer literate. They're more tech savvy. Um, and I think the tools will just get better and better. I think the tools will just get better and better. The key thing is when we're talking about large enterprises and large organizations, the core skills are still needed there. The connectivity skills,
Yeah.
the skills, the development skills. These are all, the analysis skills. These are all skills that are always going to be required. And, we will have new flavors coming along. So flavor is agile, a lot of, and the rationale behind that is time to market. People want to bring things out quicker, so they adopt certain approaches where the shortcuts are made in order to deliver a product. And I think once I, I think the core skills are always there. I think the technology is going to evolve. I mean, look at Moore's law; we've far exceeded that. But I do feel that technology is still a service enabler. It's not, it's not the be and end all. It's there to deliver value, and you can only deliver value for so long. It's creating new apps and all of that. You know what really amuses me? Some of the valuations in some of these companies is just ridiculous. I was talking to a friend of mine, and she was representing a app developer, a small app developer company.
Yeah.
You know what? If they got 500,000 downloads or something, the valuation of the company peak. It was going to be a good valuation, and I thought so I could come up with an application which basically does nothing, get 1 million downloads, and all of a sudden I've got a valuation. The thing about I'm going to finish on this. The thing about our industry, okay, is if we step back, market entry is easy. If you
Okay.
wanted, right, if you wanted, you could develop a product at low unit cost and you could enter the market. Okay, so the likes of Amazon, the likes of Microsoft, the likes of IBM, these companies are always going to be felt. They're always going to feel threatened because it just takes one developer sitting in his home, um, you know, in London, developing an application that
Yeah.
dozens of people use, and it provides a value. It's the innovation. It just takes one person to come up with that. And now, because of the tools we've got, the doability and the execution is there. So I don't know. I think there's a lot. There's a lot of change, and I think the large corporations of today may not be the large corporations of tomorrow. Because their markets, they are. We talk about the stack, but when we talk about the stack, we're talking about lots of components that especially in the billion-pound companies,
Yeah.
when you want to change direction, it's not as standing up. If you work in a bank and you say, right, I need a test server. To stand up a test server will take so many processes and will cost thousands. I can log on to GoDaddy, stand up a server for £3.49. So some of the competitive advantage that the big companies have ceases in the technology space, because it is now a level playing field. You know, I'm developing a product at the moment which is going to compete, and I've got the enablers to do it, and I'm just sitting in my office at home. You know, so yeah, I think the
Brilliant.
market. Interesting.
Well, that's kind of a message of hope for people going forward as well. There's kind of a twofold message there, Daljit. And I'd like to say thank you very much for your time, for your insights, for your overview. I really like we'll say conceptual canvas that gives us a front to back view of the world within an enterprise. Thank you very much for taking the time. It's been a real pleasure to listen to what you've had to say about it. And for those of you who run corporations who don't already know about Daljit, if you want to contact them, Daljit, where could people potentially contact you or get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm just search me on the web. I'm easily found, but I run a consultancy called Seek Consulting. I'm there. Just Google me and you'll find me. I'm happy to have a conversation about most things. So yeah, I'm there. And if you want to know more about the canvas, I tried to document as much as I could in the book. And feel free to have a look at it. So, and Jonathan, look, thank you for that. This has been quite enjoyable. So, keep up the good work.
Thank you very much. And thanks to Daljit today. And for those of you who want to watch more driven people like Daljit in different areas of life, please subscribe and look forward to talking to you again at some point in the future, Daljit. Thank you very much, sir.
Have a nice
Take
day,
care.
Jonathan. Brilliant. Bye.